Awareness, the final frontier. These are the explorations of Jonathan Robinson and Brian Tom O'Connor. Their continuing mission, to discover fresh new paths to the mystery within, to seek out new joys and new methods of awakening, to boldly go into the heart of expanded consciousness. This is Awareness Explorers.
Well, welcome once again, our fellow explorers. Great to have you. We have, as always, a interesting discussion, exploration that's hopefully going to be very useful in your love life and your friendship life. And the topic is the yoga of relationships. But before diving too deeply into that, I want to welcome my yoga relationship partner in crime, Brian Tom O'Connor. How are you doing, Brian?
I'm doing very well, Jonathan. What an interesting topic. I'm looking forward to seeing what we have to say about it.
I am also looking forward to what the great mystery puts through our mouth to our listeners. You know, the basis of this topic is we were talking about, different things we could talk about. And I conveyed a story Ram Dass once said to me, which was that he considers the cutting edge of spirituality to be relationships. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And I asked him, how so? He said, well, relationships are two people trying to become one. And when you're one not just with a person, you're one with love. And in the yoga of relationships, you get to see all the things that are in the way and perhaps purify yourself by having those obstacles either removed or disidentified from. And therefore, it's a perfect metaphor of what we're trying to do spiritually. And it changed how I looked at relationships. It eventually got me to focus on that as a topic, as I've written a couple books about relationships, and I think it really is a very underutilized and powerful path to awakening. But I'd like to, before I blab some more, get your opinion.
Well, I can see why he would consider relationship to be a perfect vehicle for looking at what is in the way of awakening, because of all the areas of our lives where we seem to most want control, it's in our relationships, particularly our romantic relationships or our spousal relationships, but also relationships among family and friends. We have the idea that, or just not even the idea, just the instinct to control the behavior of the other, to want them to act in such a way that we think we'll be more happy. And the idea of controlling our experience is one of the biggest obstacles to awakening that there is, I think.
Yeah, and we get immediate feedback. I don't know about you and your partner, Brian, but me and my wife, whenever I try to control her or tell her what's wrong with her, she never responds by saying, "Oh, now I see what you're talking about. Thank you for showing me the errors in my ways. I will have to change now, and I really appreciate this feedback." She's never done that. I'm still fantasizing that someday that happens, but I'm batting 0 for 1,000 so far. And eventually, if you listen to your life or your relationship, you can see that it does. A good relationship involves letting somebody be as they are. And that's really what we want in our relationship with reality too, to not always be fighting it, resisting it, having our agenda for it, but just being with it. And that's the beginning of love. And in a romantic relationship, or really in any relationship, you get a lot of practice.
You do get a lot of practice. You're always bumping up against it. And I think that the answer, because I run into this too. I mean, the I don't know if you would call it work, but the project of learning to accept your partner as they are, with all their faults and flaws, is a lifelong project, but one that really, I think, pays off. And certainly in my relationship with my husband, we have had to work on that because we all have ideas about what the other does wrong and our faults and flaws and what should we be doing. And I think that the best antidote to this is simply unconditional love. It's easy to say, hard to put into practice, but it's the most powerful force in the universe, unconditional love. Can you love the other person no matter what, no matter how they are, what they do, what they say, how you feel? Can you love even if you're angry, even if you're upset, even if you're having a conflict? You ask the question, what's the loving thing to do? What's the thing that utilizes your own sense of love and care?
Yeah, those are great questions. And, I have a one question test to find out how enlightened somebody is.
Okay.
Because, between us, we've been able to talk to some very enlightened people. And the question I ask is, how enlightened and loving does your partner feel you are, if you have a partner? Or I will ask that of their partner. And I think it's a really good test, because if your partner is always complaining about your behavior or trying to change you, that indicates that you're not as enlightened as you think you are. Now, a lot of times that has indicated to people, oh, well, my partner is the one person who triggers me. And romantic partners or even friends can be a really good sign as to what we need to work on. Because when somebody triggers us, that means that something in us is uncooked, something in us is still conditioned, and we are identified with it. And those are the things that keep us from peace and love.
Yes, and I think that when we are triggered, I'd like to just bring in something we discussed in our anger episode. Um, you said that when people are angry, it's practically always because there's a rule that they have, and that rule is not being followed. And I think that's actually what happens when we're triggered often, is that we have this idea that we should be completely accepted, that we should never be criticized, that other people should behave in certain ways that increase our happiness. And these are little ideas or expectations, maybe if you don't want to use the word rules, expectations of how they should be. And I think that's what causes the triggers. So it's not so much that we have to figure out what the flaw is in ourselves that we have yet failed to fix, but instead look at what our expectations of our relationships are, and can we drop them?
Yeah, can we let them go? And that's a whole area, how do you let go of all these expectations and rules? And I like things like the Sedona method and other methods, certainly meditation.
Yep.
Could I let go in this moment? We don't learn letting go. We do learn expectations. The media is always trying to give us new ideas of how ourselves or others should be, but we don't learn how do we let go of all that baggage. So here we are, we're two people who keep on putting on extra baggage, extra clothes, first one jacket, then another, and then we want to be intimate, and it doesn't go well often. So we have to learn how to let go of that baggage, let go of that extra layers. And part of that involves being more and more present and more vulnerable. And those are also things that are hard. If you want to be vulnerable to the energy that keeps you alive, you also want to be able to be vulnerable to other people. You can't, you know, have it in one place and not the other. Either you're open and unprotected, or you're protected. And if you're protected, it'll keep you from the grace of peace, and it'll keep you from the grace of love with another person.
That's right. And then you're constantly on guard in case that other person says something or does something that touches that nerve that you haven't looked at yourself, that you haven't gone deep inside and allowed yourself to experience the deep feelings in that core wound that we all carry around. When you have learned to go there yourself through deep allowing and deep meditation and insight, then you can become less protective of it, so that you're not always afraid that someone's going to touch a nerve that you don't want touched.
Yeah. As a guy, I think guys have even more of a problem than women with allowing themselves to be vulnerable. Something I have worked on, and with some success. But if you look at the word intimacy, it has the technique buried in it, into me see. And revealing stuff about yourself, I find, is easier if you're not so overly identified with it.
Yes.
Oh, it's okay to be vulnerable. That's not all of who I am. Or it's okay to take in feedback from another person, because I know my true nature is something other than this ego personality. And I find the practice of trying to be vulnerable, intimate, trying to not identify and take things personally is really, for me, a spiritual process. That's why I call it the yoga of relationships. It has a theory behind it. It has a technique behind it. And it often mirrors how much peace I feel. If I'm at peace with my wife and I'm non-defensive, I'm probably at peace with myself and with God. If I'm not, I'm probably bringing that into these other relationships as well.
That's right. That's right. And another thing that occurred to me was something that I remember hearing in an interview with Adyashanti years ago, talking about his relationship. And he said that the biggest breakthrough came when they both realized they didn't need the other person to make them happy.
Mm.
In other words, my happiness is not based on my relationship. And just as you said, the ego, we can apply awareness practices to it. The ego isn't who we are. There goes Brian again, just, protecting his own personality from criticism. That's not who we really are when we look back deep inside at awareness itself and realize we are so much bigger than our bodies. We're so much bigger than our egos. Then the ego has to be protected less. I think that was two topics I just covered. Awareness and ego, and the idea that our happiness, we are only responsible for our own happiness. The other person isn't responsible for making us happy. And the way to find happiness is to turn inside and to see where happiness is rather than where happiness isn't.
Very true. Unfortunately, the sad state is that most of the time there are many parts of ourselves that do think that happiness is in getting our partner to be a certain way. I do a lot of couples counseling with people who come to me, and they all have that common problem. Like, if that person would only do this, then I could be happy. And that's why people are always into blame. They leave their dishes out in the sink, or they don't do this, with the idea that if they did do that, I could be at peace. Well, that's really a very good indication of your own obstacles. Blame, the old statement is that when you point out, three fingers are pointing back at you. And I do a fair amount of blame in my head. But when I do, I ask myself the question, well, what shortcoming in me is this pointing to? Why do I need that person to change? And usually the answer is, oh, I'm trying to get something out there, which I really should be getting from within. And that's a confronting process. The yoga of relationships is a somewhat confronting practice.
Well, here I think we differ slightly in our philosophy and approach, even though on the whole, I think you're right. If the question is, what is the flaw in me that I'm not seeing, or what is the shortcoming? I think, is that the word you used?
Yeah.
What is the shortcoming in me that I'm not seeing? Then, of course, it's going to be a process that by its nature, it brings about your defensiveness, and has in an idea that there's something about you that's wrong, that in order to be happy needs to be fixed. And I think that the fundamental disagreement that we have is that I don't think that's necessary. I think that the human personality is flawed. It's going to be flawed. It's going to remain flawed. And the trick is seeing that that's not who we really are. It's being the background, being the bigger picture, and allowing those flaws. And then through some strange, mysterious alchemy, I don't understand, the flaws start to resolve themselves, but only if you're not trying to fix them. It's a paradox.
Mm-hmm. I found it fascinating while you were talking. I was going through this whole process, which was pretty funny. And that was, as you're presenting a point of view different than mine, the mind goes, no, I'm right, he's wrong, that type of thing. I'm kind of like very quietly defensive and proving my point in my head while you're talking. And then I think, well, actually what he's saying makes some sense. But I was noticing how hard it was just to really listen to somebody who has a different point of view. And nowadays, think of what's going on with the polarization of everything. It's almost impossible to hear people from a different point of view. And I experienced a mini feeling separate from you to feeling connected by saying, okay, that part of me that needs to always be right, quiet down for a moment. He has something to say. And even that's like a spiritual letting go process, a little taste of the yoga of relationships. So as you spoke, I started to feel like, that's a totally valid way of looking at this. And I stepped into your view. Now, of course, I'm more right than you, as always, but
of course,
we'll put that on the shelf just for a moment. And I'm going to listen to you. And I learned something. I go, yeah, okay, I can see that. And it's not that one of us is right and one of us is wrong, which is what the ego does in relationships. It's more like we each have a part of the picture. And by being able to hear the other person and let go of our defensiveness and our ideas, we can merge and learn and actually feel more connected. So even in these little moments, this yoga relationship's possible. You don't have to be married to somebody for 20 years before you do it. And talk to somebody of the other political party that you believe in, and you will have a great opportunity to go into the yoga of relationships.
That's absolutely right. But boy, was that a great example of you doing the yoga of relationships. I thought that was marvelous. And believe me, I'm the same, because I often, if someone comes up with an opinion that differs from mine or says I'm wrong, definitely my first reaction is, now wait a minute, I'm right here. How can I make the other person, So I definitely do that too. But I think you're absolutely right that you just have to stop and take a look. And you and I often have discussions like this where I say, because I'm a little bit more of a purist and I say this and this, and then you say the opposite. And then I realize, oh, that's true too. And then you talk about one of my favorite metaphors of yours, which is the two wings.
Yeah.
That when you're flying on one wing, you go in circles, but you need a balance. You need the two wings. So maybe this is, an example of that.
Absolutely.
What is that metaphor? Can you
Yeah,
describe it
that.
one more time?
So if you imagine, actually, I sometimes even have my two-wing thing here. I don't have it with me, but if you have one wing of a airplane that's very strong and very long, and the other one that's very short, the plane goes around in circles and then crashes. And with a lot of things, you're, in this case, you're more of a purist, maybe I'm more of a little bit into self-help. They each have their place. And if you only are using one, it really limits your ability to soar. But if you have both available, then when life gives you a certain situation in which the self-help wing is more useful, you got it. Or if life gives you a situation where the pure awareness wing is more useful, then you have that. And unfortunately, people tend to always polarize. I mean, you can take into what's happening with the politics now, that conservatives and liberals do both have some good ideas, but nobody's listening to each other. And therefore it becomes like a battle rather than seeing that we're really on the same team. And the idea is to listen to each other, to love each other, to learn from each other, rather than to battle and put each other down.
Mm-hmm.
And those things are spiritual processes. They're not easy to do. And we can see in our society that not many people are doing it.
That's right. That's right. And the spiritual principle that we often talk about, allowing everything to be as it is very tricky because people will say, well, how can I allow injustice in the world? And my answer to that is, how about right now? How about in the next 2 minutes? Could you allow everything to be as it is? Just for now. Or let's say you're sitting down to meditate. Just while you're meditating. You can worry about social justice later if you want to. And by all means, take action. But only take action if you think it will be effective. And if you're not willing to take the action, don't complain about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You and I like techniques and games. And I thought I'd share one of my favorite relationship games. Actually, I have a book that's just dedicated to 40 different games called More Love, Less Conflict. And these are all partnered relationship games where you use your partner to help you become less defensive or become more vulnerable or to learn something or to awaken. And since, our partner is there with us a lot of the time, it's really good to make use of that person in those ways. And it feels good as well. So one of my very simple games, it takes nothing to explain, is you have your partner ask repeatedly, what keeps you from being closer to me? And what this does, and I'll try it with you. Brian, what keeps you from being closer to me?
Well, other than the fact that we're on separate sides of the continent, I think my sense of of what's right, and what's correct and what's true.
Uh-huh. Okay. And then I'd say thank you. And then I would ask again, Brian, what else keeps you from being closer to me?
Um, Probably a deep fear of intimacy.
Okay. And when doing this, I could ask it over and over again for 15 minutes, and you kind of go through the layers. But in answering that question, it brings to awareness certain, call it obstacles to love or vulnerability, of which we all have, of course. And as you become aware of things, they, as you said, they naturally tend to have less impact or dissipate or disappear because you now recognize it as an obstacle.
Right. When you look at it and see it, then that may be the first step to letting it go, because it might be hard to let go if you don't even know it's there.
Exactly. Awareness is always the first step. And a lot of times, people don't normally ask you that question. I mean, this is probably the first time you've ever been asked that question.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's difficult because, well, first of all, right now, because of the conversation we've already had today, I feel pretty close to you. So, so it was sort of like, all right, dig deep. Like, what would, like, do I have a fear of emotion, like, or a fear of rejection, or a fear, like, if I'm too open, will somebody, you know, uh, come back and slap me down or something like that? Fears from being that started ever since I was a little kid, So you start
Yeah.
to look pretty deep at those kinds of things that you have, the defenses that we've built up. And sure, it can be definitely eye-opening. Even if you already feel close, you know that there's still going to be something that you can see. And in my case just now, yeah, I felt something deep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So these little games or eye gazing, just looking in somebody's eyes for 5 minutes, that's a way to have your stuff come up sometimes
Yeah.
and then try to get through it, relax through it, let it go.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's a lot of great games. And I know you have a bunch in your book as well, but do any come to mind?
Well, the only two-person game I have in my first book is about identity, and people sit opposite each other, and one person asks the other person, who are you?
Mm-hmm.
And the idea is that whatever the other person comes up with, so person A asks, who are you? Person B comes up with an answer. No matter what person B comes up with, person A says, no, that's not who you really are. Who are you? And you just keep
Right.
going back and forth until you've exhausted all the concepts about your identity, and realize that your identity is concept free.
Uh-huh.
Your real identity, your real deep background identity is it can't be described in words.
Yeah.
But that's not
Another,
so much. I'm sorry. That's an awareness awakening game, not so much a relationship improving game. So you may have some that are designed for, like couples.
I do, and I think both are useful. You find what attracts you and your partner now, or you and a friend. And by having a list or several at your disposal, you try them out and see which ones seem to really be alive for you. We're both of the opinion that there's no one right technique. The right technique is the ones that you try and they seem to work.
Yeah, yeah. The other I would come up with, and I know I've mentioned this before on the program, but I discovered that sometimes I didn't listen well to other people.
Mm-hmm.
My mind would wander. And partly is I would look at people, and I'm fascinated by faces and facial expression, and I would look at the other person's face instead of listening to the words that they were saying. Or I would think about what I'm going to say next, which is a very
Hmm.
typical ploy that a lot of us fall into. And what I discovered was that when I first checked in to awareness, when I just looked for, what is all of this appearing in awareness? And then I listened to the other person and noticed the awareness that the other person's voice was appearing in. Through some strange reason, even though I'm turning my attention to awareness itself, I found that I was able to listen to what the other person's saying without getting distracted. In other words, the words came through unfiltered and created both a connection between the two of us and an increased sense of awareness.
Hmm. Well, I like how you use trial and error to try different things, and listening is such a key miniature of the yoga of relationships. A lot of
Yes.
people can't listen. They have their own agenda, they have their own ideas. When somebody else talks, it's more of like, I have to put up with hearing their BS for a while, and so I can finally get back to saying what I want to say. That's how a lot of people are, and how sometimes I am, and I'm always catching myself. No, let it go. Just listen,
Mm.
and that letting go process of my ideas, my thoughts, and really listening is another example, a mini example of the yoga of relationships. Can you surrender yourself for 20 seconds or 2 minutes to really hear and be with someone else? That is
Absolutely.
not a normal, easy thing to do. Sometimes people have asked me, what was it like talking to the Dalai Lama or Oprah? And I say, they were both tremendous listeners. You felt like they had totally let go of what they were going to say next, and they were just really with you, and it was impactful because you're not used to that. And I think one of the reasons why both of them are so popular is because they really can listen.
No, absolutely right. And there's a way that we can actually practice on our own. If we sit quietly and listen to the sounds around us and see if we can listen to them wordlessly
Hmm.
or experience the sensations in our body wordlessly, that we can actually practice. If you practice listening wordlessly on your own, then it's a skill that you can develop and then you can apply to listening wordlessly to another person. They have words, but you're more skilled at not triggering the stream of words in your own mind while you're listening.
That's beautiful. I like how that you can practice it first, like with training wheels on your own,
Yeah.
and then do it with people and see if you can build up to that.
Yep.
That's great. That's great. Well, I think we covered the subject pretty well. Anything you want to add?
No, I think that we did, but I was curious to see if you, being, having written on relationships and being, being a couples therapist and all that stuff, have other advice that you want. In other words, if someone comes to you with the problems we talked about before, like, you know, my spouse just isn't behaving in a way that, it really pisses me off what they do. They do this, they do that, do that. In other words, when all their complaints are about the other person, how do you handle it? What do you tell them? What is your approach?
Yeah, well, sometimes you do want to change somebody's behavior. They're, violent or abusing dangerous drugs.
Oh,
But
yes.
taking that aside, I say that blame never works. So what works is vulnerability and understanding. And a lot of couples counseling is you being more vulnerable with what's going on with you and what you want, and you having a better understanding of how the other person thinks and feels. You know, I never have couples coming to me in the office and saying, Jonathan, we really understand each other quite well. That's why we want a divorce. You know, so it's really expanding your awareness of how does this other person feel, think, and can I really hear them and understand them? That's the beginning of love. That's the beginning of opening to another person, which is a good practice for opening up to consciousness or the universe. You know, it's
Ah,
really a very similar process. Can I be okay with that person as they are? Can I understand them? Can I really listen to the universe? Can I listen to this person? It's a lot of the same skills. And when people really become curious about the other person rather than blame them, or become open to hearing them, often what has been a great battle between them can soften back into love and intimacy.
beautiful. What a great explanation. And I think you're right that openness is such a key. And the reason that often we're not open is something you alluded to earlier, that there are many parts of ourselves that are self-protective, that
Mm-hmm.
try to avoid something that's going to hurt us. And when we see that those parts of ourselves that are trying to keep us closed, trying to keep the armor of protection up, are simply trying to protect us. They were installed when we were little kids, little babies, for the purpose of trying to prevent us from being hurt in this world. And so therefore, they're not these horrible enemies inside. They're actually parts that actually love us because they want to protect us. And so when we can feel the love of the parts of us that want us to close off, then we can start the the pathway to being more open to others.
Yeah, and that helps to dissolve them.
Yeah.
All obstacles dissolve in love, whether
Oh,
it's
yes.
loving yourself or loving somebody else. That's like the magic elixir.
Oh, that's right. I think it was Warren Buffett said, unconditional love is the most powerful force in the universe.
Yeah, yeah. Well, speaking of that, I'm going to guide people in meditation to help them be aware of and deepen their relationship. And it's going to be a little bit different than most meditations in that I'll be asking certain questions for you to ponder. And in pondering these questions, my hope is that it will allow you to have insights that will allow you to deepen any relationship in your life, whether it be a lover or a friend or even one with a child. So if you're ready, we'll give that a shot. Make yourself comfortable. And if you can, close your eyes and settle into your body as best you can. Maybe take a couple of slow, deep breaths. I want you to think about a person, just one person. If you are in a committed relationship now, that would be a good person to focus on. If not, focus on a good friend or perhaps a child. And as you think about this person, first ask, what do you appreciate or love about them? Just get in touch with your sense of care and exactly what it is about them that you most appreciate and love. And you can ask yourself, do they know this? Have they heard this from you? If not, what might be in the way of you saying that? In fact, if you had no fear at all, what might you say to this person that perhaps you have not said ever or recently? If you had no fear at all, what might you say to them? Take a moment and just listen for whatever feels right. Another way of thinking about this question might be if this was the last time you were ever going to talk to them because you were going to die or not see them again, what might you want to say to them? And notice as you imagine this conversation how that feels. If there's any block or fear that comes up, see if you can just let it go and feel that connection, that intimacy with this person. Another question. What are they here to teach you? Or what can you learn from them? Take a minute and focus on any intuitive answer. What are they here to teach you, or what can you best learn from them? And the last question, what can you help to teach them? What might they be able to best learn from you? Listen for any answer that feels right. What else can they learn from you? Now imagine being fully vulnerable and open with this person, letting go of all your obstacles, all your little things that might keep you feeling separate. Imagine hugging or holding this being, appreciating all the gifts that they've given you, a gratitude for them being in your life, for sharing moments of love, for being in this great adventure together. and silently in your head or imagining it verbally, telling them how much they mean to you and feeling even more connected. And just melting into that hug. And notice how soft you feel, how open, or if anything gets in the way of that, noticing that as well. Just allowing it to be as it is. You bow to this person, and then you come back into yourself, knowing that they are there to help you to open to the love that you really are. And as you become more in touch with your chair, your room, and your body, becoming more of an individual, yet maintaining that soft openness as you very, very slowly begin to open your eyes. Take your time. I personally love doing these guided meditations because I love watching the look on your face, Brian. The only being I ever see that blissfully happy is my dog when I pet her behind her ears. You're good at that look. So thank you.
Thank you. I love that. It was so deep. And I guess what I felt doing it was I felt like the one by one sort of little frozen inner crystals were breaking and loosening and flowing out, so that really was creating more openness.
Great. Just a little 7-minute meditation, that love and connection is what we all yearn for. And being able to have a partner that you can play this with a little bit and practice is a great blessing.
Sure is. And it can be applied to every relationship in your life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, I'm glad I'm on this journey with you, Brian.
Me
it's
too.
been a great exploration today and always, and I feel blessed that you're in my life. So thank you for sometimes being wrong so I can correct you, and sometimes being right so I can be humbled.
Yes, and thank you for helping me notice that it's important for me to be right sometimes, and maybe it's not so important.
Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah. Well, we've had a yoga relationship, and it has been growing in that way of being able to listen to each other and explore. And hopefully, we don't do it perfectly always, but hopefully that is a model for people.
Yeah, it's unique. Hey, I recommend it. Everybody, get a friend and do a podcast together.
Yeah.
A great sadhana, a great practice.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's it for today. As always, we hope that if you like this, you tell your friends, family, hit our donate button. You listen to our something like 40 meditations now that we have on our website, all free. And please support us any way you can if you're getting value. And just as important, if not more important, keep exploring.
Keep exploring. Thank you for listening to Awareness Explorers. To learn more, you can check out our website at awarenessexplorers.com. Please subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast app. We'd love it if you would post a review. And please share our link on Facebook and with family and friends, because knowing yourself as awareness is the greatest gift you can give yourself or someone you love.